Does the Galaxy S10 still hold up in 2024? Now it's 4.5 years ago since I bought this phone. What it still does better than phones today, let's just say the newer Galaxy phones from Samsung, I think the newest one is the S24 because it's the year 24. So I still have a headphone jack, which is quite nice. I also still have an SD card slot. So this is the dual device, which means I have the micro SIM inserted here, and I also have an SD card. And this allows me to expand my storage. I also have this device, and I bought this device with 512 gigabytes of storage, which is about half of the storage, which is maybe the standard storage for a notebook, which is usually 1 terabyte. And this allows me to now still be using apps. I can install apps, I can uninstall apps without constantly having to think about, okay, how is this gonna impact my internal memory? Because, well, I just don't have to pay attention to it. This was an intentional decision a couple of years ago. I could have gone for the cheaper device, which would have not that much storage. I got these devices basically refurbished for, in the beginning, 700 euros, maybe then 600 euros, and then maybe 580 euros, as I got 3 of these phones. The first one, I broke the screen. The second one, I had a defective USB connector eventually, but it was only partially it was only partially defective, so I'm still using the second phone as my camera phone, and I'm using the third phone I ever bought refurbished as my normal phone. The cameras did get, I think, a little bit better with the newer devices. So the S24 I recently tested a little bit because my father got the S24, and it was, I think, in terms of the camera, a little bit better. The S22, I think I also previously used, also had somewhat reasonable cameras. Now this has a 2x lens, it also has a normal lens. I don't know what the focal length of the normal lens is, and then it has an ultra wide, which is I think 0.5 or 0.6. The ultra wide is a very big advantage because I can, for example, take an image of my studio here, which I could not do with my camera because my camera also did not have a wide angle lens attached to it because I didn't have a wide angle lens. And so just taking these pictures and standing in front of church outside and just taking all of the picture, like this big picture where you also have this distortion, just this wide angle lens, was just a very big thing. Also in the beginning, once I got the device, I was quite surprised by the camera quality. Also, Samsung introduced later on, after I got the device, the portrait mode also on the front of the camera, which I then used for recording many videos. For example, I recorded videos in my car. Also, this device is basically the device that finally allowed me to record videos for the internet, which was kind of an intent of mine for many years. But I previously had a 70D, and then I switched to the M50 eventually, but not until, so I first got these devices. So the bet was that I just took the money I would otherwise spend on an additional camera and just invested in a better phone and used my phone as the camera. And to a certain extent this actually worked. So I recorded many of the videos on this phone. It has two microphones. So the first microphone you find down here, and the secondary microphone you find up here. It also has 2 speakers, and the speakers are also quite reasonable, I would say. So the first one is up here, and the second one is down here. You also have USB-C, you also can connect a USB-C hub, you also can connect a USB-C microphone to it, which is also quite nice. I also was able to connect 5 terabyte drives to this device, which was also quite surprising. So instead of connecting all of the drives to my notebook, and basically I just connected the same hub to my phone, and sometimes the drives would show up, sometimes they didn't show up, so not that reliable. What you also still have, also on the newer devices, but also on the Galaxy S10 still, is Samsung DeX. So you can plug this into a hub, and if in the hub there is an external monitor attached to it, then it might say, okay, you're not using the proprietary Samsung connector, but what it also might give you is basically a desktop experience. What you also can do is, with the Logitech MX keys, for example, you can just connect additionally to your notebook. So I have here multiple devices, up to 3 devices you can have connected, and I have my 2 phones as 2 and 3. So what this allows me to do is to just use an external keyboard. There is some issue though, because if you are typing normally, then the keyboard on the phone is usually a little bit different, and then you hit sometimes keys and these do not match. And also if you press the space button or the space key 2 times in a row, then it changes the language, and this screws up the experience. I did not find that I could potentially type on this. I also previously used a Bluetooth mouse, and this was also how I recorded many of the videos, by using kind of a mouse. I now don't have a Bluetooth mouse, and then I would basically start and stop the video with the Bluetooth mouse instead of having to click on the phone, which was also quite useful. So the big upsides of this is having a headphone jack, which you also can use in terms of recording video to connect analogly a microphone. And then you of course can also digitally connect the microphone, but then if you want to charge the device, then this is a problem. If you want to record analog audio and then charge the device at the same time, then there usually, in my experience, is a noise that is recorded onto the analog audio, which then is recorded onto the video, or also the audio recording if you're just doing an audio recording. In terms of using it as a phone, it gets slower and slower over the years. Maybe it's just me having that many apps installed, and of course over the years maybe the apps accumulate. If I would restart the device, so if I would factory reset, maybe it would again be as fresh as it was in 2019 when I first got the device. But currently I am not thinking about resetting the device, mostly because there is such a high time cost connected to this. Maybe setting up all of the different banking apps and all of the different authentication apps you nowadays need to have on the phone. So in total, I would say the phone still holds up. It now sells at a lower price compared to newer phones. There is also potentially another argument, and maybe before I mention this other argument, the camera, while this is still good, I in the beginning, for example, was shopping for clothes and I would just use the quick launch for the camera with this double press of the power button, and the camera would be just there and I would take a picture, and then that would be it. If I now these days take a picture like this, then every third picture at least is completely blurry or basically unusable, because well, I take the picture and the picture is not taken until I already think that it took the picture, and then afterwards it turns out to be blurry because there's a higher and higher latency with the picture taking. I don't know why this particularly would be the case. Maybe it's the issue that the apps take more and more of the RAM, but also of this internal memory, and so there maybe are accumulating effects that make this device less and less effective in computing in a given app. Now, in terms of the form factor, this is also kind of still a small phone. The newer devices are actually sometimes a little bit taller, I think. I did try the newer devices, at least for a couple of minutes, in hardware supply stores. Not hardware supply stores, but more like tech stores. I still have kind of these 3 different lenses. They're also not that different on newer devices. I think the Galaxy S24 has a 3x lens instead of the normal lens and the other lens. You also still have the pulse monitor on the back here, which you can use with Apple Weltery, for example, to measure also your HRV, which is also quite useful. The speakers are still fine, and so it holds up quite well. And now this other side would be that maybe you don't want to actually use your phone that much. Now, I use my phone as a camera. I also use it to look up emails on my phone if I'm standing in front of a packaging station, or I use it to show my ticket on a train, for example. I use it also for shopping, so I do have an app in which I record my shopping list, and then I actually recently set up a Bixby routine for the location of the store, and then whenever I am in the store and I open up the phone, then, well, it opens up the app, which I think is quite genius. But of course this only works if you have been living in a place and then you do routines or implement routines like this, because otherwise they don't make that much sense. I have been using these 2 phones to record now thousands of videos for basically the internet instead of using my camera. And so this already kind of speaks to the power of the phone. The phone is also the device I always have with me. So I usually have, whenever I go out, my phone in my pocket. Even though these days I sometimes try to not use my phone, but then I again need it to take pictures. It's the camera I always have with me, and the camera also somewhat still works, but the huge issue is, I think, the latency. So the big downsides of using this phone still in 2024 would be that it is getting slower and slower, and also the camera is getting slower and slower. The big upside is that I still have the 512 gigabytes of storage, which are not available on the newer devices unless you get one of these bigger devices, the Ultra or the Plus or something like this. But I don't want a big phone. I want a phone that I can potentially also take with me on a run, but this phone is already kind of too big for me to go on a run with it. With the HTC Desire X, which was basically my first smartphone, this was, I think, this big. And if it was this big, I could just keep it in my pocket and record my runs with it, instead of having then to have a watch, which then allows me to record the run, yes, but I also do have to additionally buy the watch, and also to keep basically capital invested into having kind of a watch, which then over time means that I am foregoing the opportunity interest in this case, well, of just getting the interest, because I would not have so much capital bound in stuff I need to own. For recording video with OBS Studio, it also works quite well. I sometimes need to adapt the exposure in the OBS client I'm using on my phone, and I am also still using this phone in order to record videos where I just walk around, for example, showing whatever is in my fridge.